This is Das Von Hunt, and I'm Xiao Pierre Ruth, your host from Information Week. Today's session will be discussing the FTC impersonation rule that just recently has gone into effect. I'm joined today by a great panel of guests. We have Jordan Burris, Vice President for Public Sector Strategy with Socure. We have AJ Nash, Vice President of Intelligence for ZeroFox. Chanley Howell, a partner with Foley and Lardner, who's got expertise in AI and cybersecurity, and Chris Briggs, Senior Vice President of Identity with Mitek. Gentlemen, thank you all for being here and being on the show today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So Jordan, good to be speaking with you. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your thoughts on, this rule just really went into effect on this past Monday, and we're just very early stages. So just what are your initial thoughts and takeaways with this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the rule in particular, right, if we're looking at it from what the FTC has done, it really builds upon kind of an alarm that's been sounded that more must be done to better understand the way that technology is being used to circumvent what would be traditional processes that have been put in place for a long period of time. In particular, specifically as we're looking at, what's being done with impersonation scams, clearly they're focusing in on how technology is being used, if you will, to cause disruption and trust that we see across any services that are being delivered.
Great. Thank you for that. Chanley, can you give us a little bit about your personal kind of expertise and your initial thoughts from this rule going into effect?
Sure. Thanks, JP. I've been practicing technology law for many, many years, and always exciting when things come along like AI. While the rule is not limited to AI, it was a clear motivating factor behind the rule. From my perspective as an attorney representing companies trying to keep them out of trouble in these areas, I'm interested in it and appreciate it as a start. It's another brick in the wall, if you will, of building the laws that are relating to AI. There aren't too many laws out there. They're coming slowly but surely. The EU AI Act has been passed. I view this as another brick. It's the FTC is acting in line, and I think we'll talk in a little more detail about it. But it does add a bit of guidance because in advising clients on how to stay out of trouble, the more guide roads and guidelines we can get from the government and on the legal front, the better. So I view it net as a positive development.
Great. Thanks for that. AJ, what have been your takeaways, and how does this kind of speak to your space of what the FTC has laid out?
Yeah, thanks for having me on it, JP. I appreciate it. As you mentioned, I'm a vice president and distinguished fellow of intelligence at ZeroFox. I also host my own podcast, Unspoken Security. We'll have to reverse this and have you guys on. I think this is really interesting. My background's intelligence. I have about 20 years in the intelligence community, so I'm excited to see the government taking action. As was just said already by Jordan and Chanley, it's a step, right? There's a lot more to be done here, but it's good to see that step. It's certainly going to help lawyers to advise clients, as Chanley said, on how companies can stay out of trouble and avoid pitfalls that are going to result in legal consequences. As an intel professional, I'm curious to see what comes next. This is probably not going to have a massive impact on cyber criminals who are outside of the jurisdiction. Being able to file a federal case doesn't necessarily result in much in terms of recouping funds or punishing people overseas who are outside of jurisdiction. But it does open the door to start having those discussions and see what's next. And as was already mentioned, there's going to be more in terms of AI and combating AI. We're seeing a lot of that. This isn't just about that, but it is another step in that direction. So I think it's great to see the progress here. I think there's a lot more work to be done, but I'm excited to see this as a good place to go next.
Great. Chris, your initial thoughts. Again, this is just the first week. The ink is still wet, and even I think there's a feedback period. What are your thoughts on this rule coming into effect?
It's interesting and an interesting precedent. At Mitek, our company is really focused on bridging consumers as they move from physical to digital, whether that's with document or some type of process that's instituted by a highly regulated organization like a bank or a telco or someone like that. And we're seeing other precedents emerge. Chanley made the reference to other types of services in other places or regulations in other places like the EU. So it's one of many. I agree it's a good step in the right direction. We're seeing it come in a direction that's really trying to define and scope out what AI looks like and protect the consumer. So it has some really good intentions. I will also, like some of the other panelists, be super interested to see the actual implementation and the practicality as it relates to how organizations like a bank is going to actually take this and put it in their back office and use it to measure risk of someone coming in the front door, either physically or digitally, and other organizations. And how do they protect against that? And how do they prove that they're protecting against that in such a way that ultimately meets those regs that, quite frankly, are probably not quite scoped out all around the edges.
Great, great. Thank you for that. And thank you all for being here to bring your expertise. It's kind of funny. It seems to be, as any kind of innovation really kind of, well, not any innovation, but certain innovation comes forward and then to hit a point where somebody has to say, please don't do X with that because that's bad. The idea that we have to tell people to not use something that can be used for the greater good. Can you not scam? Scamming is not fun. There might be incentives that those who want to make use of that, are seeking. But the idea of like, can you please no, just no. So here we are now, looking at this space. Let's talk about, we touched on a little bit of the idea of liability. What are some of the thoughts on liabilities for companies if they're potentially either maybe their technology is used in this way, again, without their awareness or their intent, or if there's something that has gone on that has, a scam or what have you has unfolded, through that, what liabilities are they facing, if they are in some way become like a vehicle or medium or what have you, what are the implications for organizations, either if they're maybe directly in some way, shape or form, or providing some generative or AI technology that might be used, or if they're in a space and then they are suddenly dealing with these scams that have kind of come to their front door because of this.
You want me to start? JP
Sure,
is the lawyer. I'll give a little not too deep on the legal gloss.
Take us to court.
Yeah. The rule is surprisingly short. I mean, very much to your point, it's basically says don't scam people. And if you scam people, we can take you to court. The reason they had to have the rule is so that they can go to federal court and get money damages a lot easier than otherwise. There was a recent Supreme Court that impacted that. I won't go down that road. Where companies, your average company, small, medium, big, Fortune 100 across the, where they need to watch out for is, they're our clients, businesses generally, we trust that they're not going to knowingly commit crimes. They're not going to scam. They don't come to us for us to tell them don't commit a scam. What they do need to be careful about, and this is the same under Section 230 that I'm sure everybody on this panel has dealt with and familiar with in the past, of sort of shielding liability for the platforms. The concepts relate even to non-platforms, but did an organization know or should have known something was going wrong and their systems were being used in a way that it shouldn't be? That could be a platform. It could be a company, a manufacturing company using AI. To your question, and the AI is used to develop fakes, or they're receiving fakes. But if things are happening and they start to creep away, not from intentionally doing wrong, but where they knew or should know that people in the organization or fraudsters are getting into their organization and causing problems with impersonation, then that's where they could face risk. And the risk comes from plaintiffs, lawyers. There's a lot of them out there looking for cases. And so they will look for ways to sue. I'll just leave it right there for now. But that's it. It sort of heads down the path where it increases the visibility of this issue, so the companies need to be more careful in this area of deep fakes.
Yeah, I've got an interesting. Well, I think it's interesting. We'll find out in a minute. I got a question for Chanley on this one, actually. So, I'm not a lawyer either. I just play one on TV. But so, in the simplest terms, I was watching this play out, right? And there's questions about what responsibility do AI platform developers have, right? Because they're the ones developing these tools. And it just, the simplest thing, this is kind of the legal question for you. So if I own a hardware store and I sell you a hammer and you go hit somebody in the head with a hammer, I'm not liable for that. If I'm own a hardware store and you come in and say, I need to buy the hammer that's best to kill this person by hitting them in the skull, and I sell you the hammer, do I become more liable? Because now I know there's intent behind it and I choose to do it. And is that essentially what we're dealing with here now?
Yeah, thank you. That there's not much for me to do. You just did the law school class. No, that's a perfect example. It's if they have reason, if someone has reason to believe that either their system, it may not be the company's own AI, but just their network. And to your point, but yeah, the more knowledge you have that your company is involved in something that is fraudulent, the more you are at risk for being brought into that, either rightfully from a regulator. I'm not worried right now about FTC coming after businesses, whether it's our clients or other companies, for violating this law. I am concerned that there will be plaintiffs' lawyers when their clients get scammed and they see an opportunity for a class action or just a multi-million-dollar case to say, hey, you should have known that this was happening. Look, there's all these laws, including this new FTC rule. It's another quiver in the arrow for those types of claims.
So it's going to come down to what people. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Is it just going to come down to what people should know? I mean, there's that's a judgment call, right? That gets into judges deciding based on the evidence available, what was created and at what point you should have been able to conclude that this was probably malicious, beyond a reasonable doubt. Is that kind of the thing?
Yeah, could be judge or jury, but it'd be more of a preponderance of, just a way to the preponderance.
Right, it's not criminal.
Evidence, not a criminal.
Civil,
so that's why there's potential risk here, even if companies aren't intending to commit scams. If they're getting close to them or people under them are using it, that could be a problem.
Got it. Sorry, Jordan, I didn't mean to step on you. Go ahead.
No, it's all good. Trust me. And I also don't pretend to be a lawyer, but I guess one thing that's always a curious point for me, and it's part of the conversation, is to around the extent to which there's still gaps that are created basically by the void and what's not being talked about here, right? If we're thinking about liability, if we're thinking about the way organizations are handling or how platforms today are being used for things such as e-commerce at scale, right? There's a question of, when you get down to the end of it, identity is really what could be compromised here. And that is the thing that is a linchpin for establishing trust ultimately between businesses and governments, et cetera, right? At Socure, we focus very heavily on verifying, every element of someone's identity and doing so with, highest degree of coverage and classification accuracy. But to do that, it's about understanding all the areas in which, if you will, verifying the identity or using it goes bad, and how it can be used to perpetuate scams, various different types of attacks, right? You think about money mule attacks, if you think about how synthetics are prevalent within various financial ecosystems, and perhaps these accounts are then being used by the fraudster who is impersonating someone to say, wire me money to do X activity, right? And so there's a question for me about, did we go really far enough with what the FTC started, right? And the question is, should we be considering really how identity is crucial to everything that is, happening in this space, especially when we're talking about the interaction between businesses, consumers, or even the government?
Yeah, good point.